So we're going to talk about Python. We're going to learn about how to do stuff with AI later on. This is the first of many. Have you guys used Python at all?
Yeah.
Ever? Oh, okay. So then this is just going to be a real quick review.
If we had time, I would love to learn about this.
Okay. we can always do it later too. My name's Terry. A lot of people seem to like using Python, so I actually have a group of classes. And people from MLH Host, they actually were really nice and put a slide deck together. So that's what I've been using. Python's actually pretty useful. I like it for scripting because when I first started at the school, we used Bash, and I was like, this is interesting. I'm gonna go with awful, and and so I was talking to some people, and they were like, well, you could use Perl, and I was like, that's another no, and so Python was like the third option, and I was like, I can use Python. And so I started using Python not for programming, but more for scripting, which was kind of interesting. And it was a lot easier. Yeah?
Wait, what's scripting again?
So if I tell a computer, hey, I want to go do something, I can call a script to do that. Like, let's say you want a very common one when you get into the computer action team is you're going to actually write a script that says, I want you to send a print command to all of these other printers. Every single printer that we have to check. So you can either type a print command to 10 different printers, or you can say, hey, script, I want you to send a print command 10 different times. And then later on, you can add certain things so that, hey, print command, I'm going to give you a list of very specific printers. I want you to only send it to them. Or if I'm sending you no parameters, I want you to just send it to everybody. And so you can use these little tools as building blocks. So a Bash script looks fundamentally different than a C-type language, which is why I didn't like it. You would actually have to define the beginning of your loop and the end of your loop, and you've got dollar signs sprinkled throughout, and you've got double quotes that mean very different things than single quotes, and it's a bit of a learning curve on how to learn it. Whereas Python, we're going to go through that a little bit more. You don't have to do a lot of very specific operations because the language just does it. Okay, so we're going to go over some stuff that you can do with Python, some basic syntax and structures, and then how to create different programs. If you want to go into more of the scripting things, we can definitely go into that. But we're specifically going to talk about the program stuff right now. If you can, go to this URL and this is pretty much, hey, MLH, I just want to send you a thank you. They're going to say, oh, you were doing this, and we used our slide deck. And we were like, okay. But if you ever want to do any of these later, this slide deck is actually open. So if you're interested, you can always do this later. And if you need help, you can always come see us or specifically me, and we can actually walk you through whatever part you aren't. And this is just the basic building blocks for the next 3 classes. So the next class, we're going to actually interface the Python program with Twitter. And then the third one, we're actually going to be implementing the AI in order to make that work. Okay? So who uses Python? Netflix is one of the really big ones. Whenever you're going to be doing a lot of heavy lifting and you want to do it very quickly, Python's one of those things that a lot of people like. A very common thing is it's the second best language to do anything. So if you're trying to, yeah?
Let's see, which organization is hosting this event?
This is the ACM.
I'm not quite seeing it.
Do Portland State then. I didn't.
Like, for some reason, it's not popping up either. It's,
Weird.
yeah. Like, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm getting better luck with my phone.
I guess other in this.
Yeah, just put other.
Yeah.
Which MLH local cost activity are you participating?
So this is Python, Intro to Python 1. It's in the top left corner.
Oh, all right.
Yeah.
So namely, okay, so in this case, it's the, so this ACM. B1.
Yes.
Gotcha. And
Yep.
Intro to Python skills for AI part 1.
Yes. So if you hear people talking about like TensorFlow, NumPy, these are all libraries that Python has put the building blocks from.
oh, yeah.
Those are two of the very most popular ones. Yeah.
Organization. Which
So the ACM, it's the Association for Computing Machinery.
If it doesn't pop up, you might as well do other. If
Yeah.
you type it in.
Oh, other?
Yeah.
Yeah, like that's what I had to do.
Oh,
It's weird that it came up last time I taught this class. It's kind of weird, but okay. But if you're doing machine learning or AI, Python is one of those ones that is usually brought up right to the front. If you're not using Python, you work for a huge conglomerate that like wrote their own language pretty much. If you want something that has not that much of a barrier to entry, Python's usually the one you're going to go with.
It looks like the Intro to Python is like associated with Capital One.
Yes.
Okay.
So they're the ones that did work with them, and you'll actually see their logo on pretty much every slide.
Got it.
I don't know to what degree they work together on. I just know that Capital One slides are everywhere, and they're, I don't know, they did a thing. They were awesome.
So, you said we're going to be making I think a Twitter bot.
Yeah. So what the first class, what we're going to do today is a very basic intro to Python. We're going to go over how it handles variables, how it handles functions. We're going to write some stuff, how to write very basic Python stuff. The second one's a little bit more advanced, and we're going to actually interface the Python and create a bot to interface with Twitter. And then the third one, we actually make a better bot, and it uses AI.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so what you can do is if you go to this web page, you'll actually see the website that we're going to be taking a look at. So if you go there, you'll see something like this, and you'll put in a handle that you can send the tweets out to, and then they'll just be this interface here. So some popular ones are like NASA, you've got Taylor Swift 13, some people have their own Twitter accounts that they can talk to.
I just got a random one, it seems.
Okay, yeah, I think it just gives you something.
Yeah, Jason Britton.
Okay,
I have no idea who it is.
okay. So what we can eventually do is everybody who's using this Twitter account, we're going to use what's called web scraping. So Python's really good with libraries, like I was saying. So there's different ways you can pull information out. So there's web scraping systems in order to do like all of the Wikipedia pages, or somebody I know was big into magic, so he actually scraped a bunch of websites to see what the meta game is for all these systems are. So yeah, it's very handy. And then once it has this script, you can actually run functions on it. So I'm in the site reliable engineering class right now. So I actually wrote a script that will go over all of the logs and says, were the web queries successful? And if they were not successful, what kind of error was it? So it was looking for a bunch of 200 error codes, a 404 error codes, which was, hey, I'm not even serving that request, or something at a 500 level when I was switching stuff back and forth, and I didn't have a load balancer hooked up to it yet. So, but those are some things you can do. You can run some regex stuff over it, and it's very, very powerful. Okay. But right now we're going to learn how to do functions. Okay. So let's go ahead and go to learning how to do Python. Okay. So this gentleman here, he started Python in 1991. It's very often for prototypes. When you're trying to do something very quick, and we're going to go into the differences between an interpreted code like Python and a compiled code like a C language. So we'll go a little bit more in that. Okay, so just like the C languages we're used to working with, we've got variables. And you can store stuff. Think of it like a label or that you're putting on a box. One of the things you do have to remember is the difference between a string and a number. When you're using Python, you're not explicitly telling Python what it is. So it's not like C where you're saying int variable name equals number. In Python, you're just going to say variable name equals number, and it will know it's a number you're storing in there because you don't have quotes around it is usually how you do it. Or 0.0, well, obviously you need a float. In a loop, if you're going to be doing something over and over again, you're unlike so let's say you're wanting to do a for loop. You'll notice that the structure looks a little bit different. So instead of going from a number to another, you're going to actually force something in the list. We'll go with that a little bit later. Another thing is indentation matters tremendously. You're not using curly braces to separate blocks of code. You're actually using white space to visually separate it, and the interpreter will know what you're trying to do. Okay, this will make more sense when we actually play with the code. And when we run it, when you have problems, it'll actually run into that problem. It'll execute until it literally destroys itself. Unlike a C where it compiles and it can do some static analysis, because it's executing each line of code at a time, it can create some interesting situations. Okay, so the first thing, if you can go to this website, it's going to ask you to do a sign in. You can do a sign in with your email, you can sign in with Facebook, or you can use GitHub. However you want to get into it, we'll just click into there. Okay, so when you get there, you should see something like this. Actually, you're going to look something like this, where it says this. Okay, what you're looking for is this button in the lower right corner that says Remix Your Own. Okay? Are you having issues? Oh, go to the URLs. https://. Okay. To the right of that, put what is it? Basic training. Yeah. Put tilde basic hyphen training hyphen I.
Oh, is it slash?
Yeah, keep the slash there, and then basic hyphen training hyphen I. Perfect. And then scroll down to the bottom, and then click Remix Your Own. Perfect. Welcome. You good?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is awesome.
I really like how they set this up because this is going to all be done in the browser. If you're interested, we can also talk about how we would do this on the school systems, but for right now, this is one of the easiest ways to get into the language. We don't have to download anything. There's no library dependencies we have to mess with. We're just going to play around with it. Okay. Okay.
Is it a new project?
You should be looking for basic training -I. Do you not see that? Oh, so at the end of this, put a slash,
Oh, that's fine. I did that.
tilde, basic, hyphen, training, hyphen, I. Enter. Okay, scroll down the bottom and remix your own. Perfect. Okay, so now we're going to actually play around with Python, okay?
Yeah.
So click on the right side and go to variables.py. And you should see something like this. Okay, and then so in this block, you're going to notice that instead of 2 slashes like C or C++, we actually are using a hash or a pound symbol in order to say this is a comment. Okay? So in the first one, instead of putting my age, just put A. You don't have to do this whole thing. But the crucial part is to not put quotes around here. Just put the name equals a number. The second one will be, you can either use single quotes or double quotes to make it a string. And then you can do the print command. So when you do hello world, you are literally saying print, open quotes, quotation marks, hello world, and parenthesis, and that's hello world. It's pretty marvelous. There's none of that standard in, standard out. There's none of that boilerplate that C has. It's do this, and it does it. A lot of people make fun of Python as it's readable stuff that compiles. Okay? So when you're putting strings together, look at the bottom line. You're saying, hello, this is a thing. And then you're adding onto it the my name variable, and then plus another string. Okay? So it just kind of adds it all together with a nice operator. Another way you can do that is to use these curly braces inside that string and use the dot format function. So after your string, you can put dot format, open parentheses, and actually list your variables in a comma-separated list. And then finish your quotation. Okay? Does that make sense to everybody? Anybody have problems? Okay. Now, if you noticed, let me go ahead and go here. So we're in the variables. A equals 1. Thing equals thing. And then print. Okay. Now, in order to actually run this, we're going to click on Tools, and then click on Logs, and then click on Console. Okay? So Tool, Logs, and then Console. And then you're at a command prompt. At the command prompt, you're going to actually tell it what you're going to be doing. So we're actually using Python. I would like you to get in habit of specifying what version, because we are using version 3. You can tell this by the parentheses and the quotes. However, Python is apparently hard-coded in their back end to just use Python 3. And then we're going to run a variables.py. So we're going to say, hey, computer, use Python 3 to do what follows next. OK? And it went here. We set a equals to 1. We set thing equals to thing. And then I said, hey, print this with this. And then I used that format. OK? Does anybody have questions on what we just did? Yeah.
How was it that you moved on? I was not noticing.
OK, in the lower left side,
Lower left.
yeah, there you should see tools.
Yeah.
And then logs. And then console. And then say Python space variables.py. And then enter. OK, there you go. Perfect. OK? You doing good?
Yeah.
Perfect. OK. Now, you can always go back to this and play around a little bit more, but we're gonna keep going to the next version. To this right here. So when you're going into there, you can set a equals 5, and then we're going to replace this with b. And then we're going to say OK, so we're going to play around with this a little bit. And notice how I had to take away the quotes in order to make this happen. You can't do mathematical operations on strings. So when you're saying this string plus this string, you're simply concatenating those strings together. You're not actually adding the letter A, B, or the letters A, B, C to the letters B, C, F. Okay, you're actually just smashing those strings together to create one string. This, however, is I'm going to the container A and saying I've got a 1, and I'm going to container B, and I'm saying this one is a 5. I'm adding them together with a mathematical operation that gives me 6. I'm storing that value in a box that says C. And then I'm using that dot format that we did where it says go to the box A, go to box B, and go to box C, and give me all of those values and put them in my string. OK? Does that make sense? OK? And now we can go ahead and hit the up arrow and rerun that variables.py. OK? OK, so this is all well and good. However, if there's a bit of code that you want to use over and over again, we absolutely are going to want to use a function. We're not going to get in the habit of copy-pasting these functions. Carla would be mad, and we're never going to do that in an actual environment. So we're going to figure out how to call a chunk of code in a specific way. And to do this, we're going to use this def statement, okay? So we've got your name equals a string. Go to the functions.py. That'll have some boilerplate that we can play around with. So the def statement says, hey, Python, this is a function coming up. Pay attention. You're going to then specify the function name and then the parameter that you're going to specify in here. Notice it doesn't have what type of thing that name is. It's just going to figure that out for you. Make sure you also don't forget this colon at the end, okay? When you're switching from C languages to Python, that's always a fun one. The curly braces are also another gimme. Notice this print statement does not have a semicolon at the end. That'll get you more than a few times. So this indentation is also crucial. Another get you is you cannot make spaces equivalent to a tab in Python. If you see 4 spaces and the following line says a tab, Python doesn't like that. Okay? Okay, did anybody have trouble with this? Okay. Okay, so back into our functions.py, we can also make a list of variables. So we can actually make Jamie a first name. And then we could do a last name. And then we can change our say hello function to match those functions. No. So, did you see what I had to do here? When I added this variable here, you need me to make it bigger?
Oh, no.
Okay.
I'm just gonna go closer and look at it.
Okay. So when we changed the profile here to needing 2 arguments, we had to change the profile here to use the same 2 arguments, and this needed a second argument in order to make that work. Okay? All 3 of those needed to be changed. So when I added this line, I had to make it here to make that change.
What's the format thing? Dot format.
Say that again?
What is the dot format?
So the dot format is saying, in the order that you see a parameter, I want you to fill in these curly braces with what I say here. There's a couple different ways to do it in Python. We're using this way.
Alright.
There's also another one where you can put an F saying, hey, this following string, I'm going to do stuff with it, which is kind of on the newer side, but
Yeah.
this is the way that we're doing it for
It's
now.
quite different than what I'm used to. Yeah, we're working on Python, but I don't know, we've never used it like that. Because when I was trying it personally, I didn't use the format thing, but
Okay.
I still put a comma and then whatever variable you choose, kind of.
Okay. Yeah. There's a few variations. I mean, you can just concatenate it. There's nothing wrong with just putting this and then a plus sign and then the variable name. And then putting this here. It's
Yeah.
there's
But one thing I noticed is that when I hit print, I don't know why, it just starts bringing up the bracket. Shows the bracket as well, which I don't.
print does that?
Yeah, wait, you want to see it?
Yeah. Let's take a look and see what's going on.
So this is how I did this. So it takes 2 arguments and it says difference hello.
Oh, so you need to put the dot format. So where you're going to need to say, so you're saying hello,
Yeah.
and you're going to say first name and last name. So after hello, put a space, but inside the quotes. Yep. And then put a open curly braces and a closed curly braces. Okay, and then a space, and then do that again. And then right here,
Right here?
yep, so delete that comma,
Alright.
and then go back one more, and then put dot format, and then open parenthesis, Nope, not the curly braces, a parenthesis. Yep,
Parentheses. Oh,
yep. There we go. Okay. And then on the other side, we need to add one.
yeah.
Okay. Okay, now try running that. Okay, there you go.
Oh, perfect. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. So you see how this is working? It's taking that string and then formatting it and replacing these variables with those.
So wait, let me show you which one I was
Okay.
talking about.
Yeah.
Let me just make this one comment word now. So let's say a equals 3 and this is how it's so in this version of Python, it is supposed to bring like this. Maybe it's a different variation. but-
No, that's a different variation. That's fine. Don't worry about it.
Alright. Yeah, I just want to make sure.
Yeah, that's not as popular as it once was because you can only add it to the end, whereas this one you can put it anywhere in that string.
Oh.
So you're explicitly saying the variable I'm passing to you goes right here.
Oh.
And also you can be very exact. So let's say there's 3 different places but the same variable name.
Yeah.
You can actually label the variable name at the end and put it where you want in there, inside the string with labeled inside the curly braces. So it's a little bit more flexible.
Oh.
But that works. I'm not saying it's bad. It's just you only have the option to put one variable at the end when you do it that way.
Oh.
But it does take a bit of extra. So notice how you're not putting a dot format. You're not
Yeah.
using that function at all. You're just put the variable here. And it's fine. You good?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Okay, any other questions before we continue on here? Okay. Okay, so now I want us to kind of walk through. We're going to do this right here, where we go to the challenge. Oh, actually, before we do the challenge, so right under all the challenge, this is what we're going to do for the first one. Actually, what would the code be for these multiplying two numbers? Okay, first you need to define the function, and then you're going to pass these 2 numbers in. Okay? Does that make sense what we're doing here? We're just doing the same math operation that we've been doing before. Okay? Now, what we're going to do now is we're going to use a return statement. So just like in C, C++, we can actually say, I want to return 1, return 0. In this case, we're going to actually return the concatenation of a string and sending it to a variable name. So go to the returns.py, and you're going to actually see, here's the function. We're passing in the 2 parameters that we did before, and we're going to set a variable name to full name. And we're going to say, hey, I want you to call this function on this variable. And that will actually make it so that the first letter becomes capitalized, and the first letter in the last name becomes capitalized, and then it will return that whole string. Okay? So after running all of this, go ahead and execute it and tell me what does this do? At the end of the function running, what gets returned? Has anybody got a chance to run it yet? What got returned?
It's a string. It's all concatenated and it's all.
What comes back from the command prompt though?
I added an extra print.
Oh, you already added the prints in. Okay, so that was the point I wanted to do. So, like Carla would say, you didn't catch the return value. You called this function with these things, and it came back, and you didn't catch the return. Yeah, so what you can do is either encase this whole thing in a print statement, or set it to a variable and then print that variable. Okay, but until you do either of those, all you're doing is running through this, you're creating this string, and then you're letting it loose to the ether. Okay. So we can set it to result, but you could also just put this return print statement and then encapsulate this whole thing with it. Okay. Does anybody have any questions on that? Okay, so now that we can run this, let's talk about loops. Now, if you were going to do a day 1 through 10, there's a lot of repetition there. So instead of putting down 10 different ways to do this, let's do a real quick loop that would just run through this. Okay? Now, remember when I was saying how it looks a little bit different? So go to the loops.py and go ahead and put this in here. For num in range, and then put 10 in parentheses. So we're going to use the range function. And then we're going to use that dot format function that says print, and then day, space, and then the number. Okay? And then go ahead and run it. Now, when we were looking at it before, just to let you know, what should the first day operation come back as? As computer scientists, we should know that the first number in any function, it's going to be 0. It's always going to start with 0. Okay. Did you all get to run this to actually see what's happening here? Yeah. Yeah. Oh.
Dot.
Yep. Dot format.
So
No.
wait, if I put it like this,
Yep.
don't we have to declare a number or something like that, or
We're not. You don't have to declare any of that. You're saying, hey Python, I'm using a variable called num. It's going to be each value in the range 0 to 10.
Oh,
That's how you do it.
so will it include 10?
It is going to include 10. Go ahead and run it.
Let's see.
So Python. Oh, you're absolutely right. It is 0 to 9. I'm sorry. Yes, you are absolutely right. It's 0 to 9. Okay, so we see that it starts out too early and then ends too early. So what are what are some of the options? So the first thing we can do is we can just make the next number 1 bigger. And then the other option is we could just add 1 to num and say go to 0 to 10.
Oh,
See if you can tone.
Well,
wait, if we add 1 to number, won't it start from 1 or still gonna
it would start from 1. Yeah.
Oh,
I mean, if you really want to start with 0, it's
yeah, I guess you can.
it's however you want. I just want the big thing is it doesn't take this last number. The range starts at 0 and ends at that right before that number. So it's a range from 0 to less than this number. Okay, that's the critical part of it. And that's how that's kind of how this works is you're looking for 10 numbers at index 0. So in order to get 10 numbers, you start with 0 and then get 9 at the end. Okay? Okay. Now, we're going to talk about lists. So in a list, we're not going to really call it an array, but it's a thing of values that can be put together as one object. So if we put an empty list together, signaled by the square brackets, in Python, you're going to say, hey, I want to have a thing. You can specify it as empty by just putting those brackets with a type. So if you say, I want an empty list, you put some square brackets around and say, hey, I want an empty list. And it will give it to you. So this is in the lists.py that we're playing with right now. And then we can put a list of values. And so this one's got all the planets in there. So if we go and print names and then print planets, what is the output going to look like? Actually, let's go ahead and so when you're using Python, this is one of the things to remember. It's going to print out the types, and it's going to put it out the way you see it here. So if I print out an empty list, I don't get an empty space back. I get what Python says, you have an empty list. Same thing if I say print planets. You're not going to get a list of just the planets. You're going to say, hey, I've got your list. They contain strings, and this is them. Okay? Does that make sense to people? Okay. Now we can add values to it with a .append function. So if we want to add some crazy planet called Pluto to the list of planets, it will allow us to use the dot append function, and we will just add Pluto to the list of planets.
The append function only takes one argument.
Say that again?
It only takes one argument, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Say that again?
So now what's Mercury?
It's a function. So you've created a list using your append.
Oh.
So
so
put dot append and then parentheses. Yes, just like that. Now that'll work. Yes. Okay.
All right.
Yeah, if you want to, because if you did something like planets equal and then create a new list and only put Earth in there, you're now replacing the planets with Earth. Dot append is say with this existing list, I want you to tack on something else. Okay. Here I can. Oops. Okay. Is that a little bit easier?
So would that print screenshot?
Say that again?
Is it gonna link things?
Yes. Because like we were saying earlier, these are all zero indexed. So we're going to skip over the first one and just print out the the second one with an index of 1. Okay? Okay, now, in order to actually print out the planets kind of how we would expect the planets to be and not in how Python thinks planets should be printed, we're going to say for planet in planets. This is a very, very simple way that Python iterates over everything. That's why it was important when we iterated over before that we started at 0 and end 1 less. Because everything's indexed to 0, it allows you to say for planet and planets, starting at index 0, give me the entire number that is in here. Okay? Because if we went from 0 to 10 and included that, we would have an extra number that we didn't have data for. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and talk about imports. So if you go to imports.py and you type import returns, this is actually hooking up with our imports.py function. So if you look through the list and you see returns.py, it carries this thing that says create a full name function. And that's where we're getting this function. This function is not defined inside imports. It's defined inside returns. So that's how we're going to pull this in. This is how a library works. You're going to say import something. Okay? Also notice that in order to call on this function, we actually need to preface this as returns dot. This is how it knows where to find this function. Because we say, hey, it's in this, I'm calling on it, and then we put a dot, and then we can utilize it that way. Okay? Does that make sense? Yeah.
Wait, it's just a general question.
Yeah.
What does returns do? It's a library, right?
No, we're using it as a library, but if you click on returns, this is what it's identifying it to. So just click on returns.
Oh.
It's calling on this C. So you would use C full name because that's what's defined here.
Oh.
So you would say returns dot C full name, and then you could call on the names. Okay, and that's how you would use it.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay, perfect.
It's like a namespace.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is. And
I guess you-
there's no difference between this namespace and like a normal library function.
Things.
It needs to pull the code from somewhere. In this case, we're just pulling it from right next door.
It's two different things. You make two different functions. Lowercase, uppercase, change it.
Okay, so along this vein, we can import something called random. So if we go import random, it's going to actually look for the code from a file called random, and we're going to say I want to print a random from random a rand int, and then it takes two arguments. In this case, we're using 0 and 100. So you're telling, hey computer, I want you to this file called random. I want you to find the function called randint and pass it these two parameters, a 0 and 100. What it amounts to is, hey, give me a number that is between 0 and 100. Okay? Okay, so now let's go to the challenge.py. We're almost at the end here, and we're going to play around with this. Oop. Okay, so do you kind of see what we're having to do in this thing? First we have 0 numbers, then we have 1 numbers, and then 2 down the list until we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 numbers. Yes?
Are they all random?
Say that again?
Are they random?
Yes, the numbers are random. But we're going kind of through the output. So what do you think the section that controls this part, the shape of the data, is going to look like?
Oh. So I guess we can make a loop.
Exactly. We're going to make a loop just like the other loop. And that loop is going to say, this is how many times you're going to produce a random number. So the first loop goes through and it says, give me 0 random numbers. And it says, okay, here's a number. Don't care. We're not making it. And then we're going to print that. The second time it goes through it, that number equals a 1. So it says, give me 1 random number. And then it prints it. And so on through it. Okay? Okay. Did you guys want to work on this, or you want me to just kind of show you what it looks like at the end? Okay, because we're getting close on the end, so we're just gonna go to the end, and then we'll have more time for questions. Okay, so this is kind of what it's going to look like. Can you guys see this? Okay. So we're going to import random because we need the random numbers. We're going to define this function. I would never consider something this long, but sure, whatever. So then the number of the items. Okay. We're then going to have that list. We're going to initialize it with an empty list. And then for the number in the range of the number of items, we're then going to append a number from 0 to 100, just like we saw in the previous slide. And then return that. So this is that outer loop that creates the shape of the array. And it's going to feed in the number that it needs to produce. And then it's going to print that list. Okay? There are a few ways to do this. This is just one of them. Okay. Does that make sense, though? Okay. Okay, so just as a recap, if you want to look into data analysis and artificial intelligence, I would definitely start playing around with Python now. I personally like using it for scripting, just because you can use it as a scripting language and as programming. You have a lot of functionality on how to control the manipulation of stuff, and we can do it even further by doing those import statements. So, like I was saying, TensorFlow has its own library. If you want stuff to run fast, NumPy is very popular. If you want, Matplotlib is also very popular for doing some charts. You can play around with that. If you want to learn more stuff, you've got Google, or if you've got something very specific, you can ask me the question right here. But we also, next Tuesday, are going to have the second workshop where we're actually going to link it with the Twitter feed, okay? Okay. We're going to actually link a program to a Twitter feed. So you're going to actually write a program. Well, it's going to kind of be the same, where most of the code is there, and we're just going to tweak it a little bit to finalize it.